Right, and America has woken up to the aftermath and what is being seen as the biggest inflection point in U.S. political history in recent times. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has survived an assassination bid during a rally in Pennsylvania. A bullet grazed past Trump's right ear while he was on stage. Within moments, the U.S. Secret Service agents were seen whisking him off the stage and away from the rally venue.
And Donald Trump, in fact, is safe, and on his social media page, Truth Social has written that now more than ever, America needs to stand united. US President Joe Biden, meanwhile, has called the attack a sick assassination attempt. Let's in fact try and take a look at that video that has sent shockwaves across the world.
If you want to really see something that said, take a look at what happened. Let me get my shoes.
I got you, sir. I got you, sir.
Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we gotta move to the bus. Let me get my shoes. Okay, my shoes down. Watch out.
Absolutely shocking there, and world leaders have condemned this assassination attempt. In fact, joining us from Washington, D.C., Nick Harper is with us at this hour. Thanks very much, Nick, for being with us. What exactly is the sentiment in America as Americans wake up to this absolutely horrific news? Of course, gun violence is not rare in the States, but this is absolutely unprecedented, as we were discussing earlier as well, particularly because of the timing.
Good evening, Vedant. Good evening, Tanima from Washington, D.C. Yes, it is dominating headlines here in the United States, as you would rightly expect. We have Americans waking up to the news, but also it's being discussed widely on the cable news talk shows. It's still Sunday morning US time, and that is a time when each week politicians go on various news networks to round up what's taken place during the course of the week and look ahead to the next. And undoubtedly, this is dominating headlines. We're hearing from politicians on both sides of the aisle, so Republicans and Democrats, that this type of political violence has no place in American society. Both sides calling for political discourse, but also the temperature to be taken right down, and calling for unity, for the nation to come together. As we've seen Donald Trump on Truth Social also posting in the last couple of hours, that call for unity, saying in this moment more than ever, we stand united, remaining strong and determined, not allowing evil to win. But of course, it's whether or not voters out there take heed of those calls from both sides to turn the temperature down. It's something that's undoubtedly going to be playing out for days, potentially weeks to come.
Right. Nick, you are in Washington, and I believe President Joe Biden is already there. In fact, he got a debrief about this situation. He's also commented on this incident, calling it a sick assassination attempt. We'll wait and see if the president comments on this again, or whether, in fact, even Donald Trump himself comes out on camera to give a video statement. But before we get into the political ramifications of this, I want to know what more have we gleaned about the incident itself and also the shooter, because in its press conference, the FBI did not spell out any motive clearly, and what we have in fact been reading the reports over here is that this 20-year-old shooter was a registered Republican, did not leave behind much of a social media trail for investigators to get much of a clue about what was going on in his mind over the past few days. So anything further that we have got in terms of the investigation into what was the motive behind this particular attack, and very importantly, whether there is an existing threat still. Was he acting alone? Was this a lone wolf attack?
Well, at this stage, the FBI is not suggesting that he had any accomplices, that he worked with others, or that there is any continuing threat as a result of what unfolded at that rally in Pennsylvania. Some of the details that they have put out so far, as you said, a 20-year-old gunman being named this morning here in the US as Thomas Matthew Crooks from Bethel Park, Pennsylvania, less than an hour away from the rally site in Butler. They are still trying to determine the motive, but as you mentioned, he in the past has been a registered Republican. There are many questions now that they need to try and determine. You mentioned that online presence. That's something that they will be digging into to see whether he made comments or suggestions in the past that might have pointed to the actions that he took less than 24 hours ago, but also looking into how he came by that AR-15, whether that was something that he owned legally. There's been reporting in the last 30 minutes from unnamed sources, this not yet confirmed, but it may have been a case that this gun was actually owned and purchased by his father, and very recently in the last 6 months or so, and it may not have been the gunman's gun, but rather a firearm that belonged to his father. His father has been questioned. He has said that he wouldn't do any interviews, but he did say that he's trying to figure out what happened when he spoke to one US media outlet. But it's those type of details, in particular the motive, that this FBI-led investigation now really needs to dig into to try and get to the bottom of.
That's right. And Nick, as somebody who's covered the White House extensively as well, break it down for us, because, you know, what we saw was absolutely unprecedented, how the shooters managed to, in a sense, evade Trump's security. Who takes care of Trump's security? What is the Secret Service? Break it down for our audiences here, because, you know, how that plays out is also extremely crucial, because there are questions on security lapses. You know, the FBI has, of course, said that the motive is not clear, but we have seen in the past couple of years, particularly, that the Secret Service has sort of raised many questions as far as their security cover is concerned.
Well, it is the US Secret Service's job. This is their one and only job, to look after, to provide security and make sure that there are no attempts on the life of sitting or former presidents. And Donald Trump, as a former president, has that Secret Service detail. So it is that question of how they were able to get this so spectacularly wrong. Where were the security lapses in all of this? Because the Secret Service has a hand in assessing sites that presidents or former presidents are going to be speaking at. They would have done a site survey of this place. They would have assessed any potential threats. They would have looked at the area. But as we know from what unfolded, a gunman was able to get to a roof about 120 meters away from the president and fire from that rooftop. That is a rooftop that would have been assessed as part of the Secret Service detail and that site survey, that site assessment ahead of the president speaking there. So it is a real question now as to essentially what went wrong. How did they drop the ball? How did we get to this point where a gunman was able to shoot at the former president? We know that that is something that will be part of the FBI investigation, but there's also a political dimension as well, because Republicans, as you would expect, are furious. They really want to find out what went wrong, and they've already said that they are calling the head of the Secret Service to testify before an open committee in the House of Representatives in about a week and a half's time, July the 22nd. That'll be the time when that testimony will take place. Republicans and probably Democrats as well will absolutely want to know what went wrong and where there were those lapses in security.
Right, Nick, quickly before we let you go, what about the whereabouts of Donald Trump? Some reports suggest that he might have gone back to his home in New Jersey. He was, of course, seen in that video, another video which came through, of him deplaning. So any information about where Donald Trump is? And we know that he's supposed to attend this Republican convention in Milwaukee. So does that stand as per schedule? Any news on that front?
Yeah, that still stands. Donald Trump was treated very briefly in Pennsylvania just after the shooting. He then travelled to New Jersey. We saw that video of him coming off the plane. The thinking is that he's at his golf course in Bedminster. That's where he has a residence. It's unclear how long he'll remain there, but he's already said that, yes, he is still attending the Republican convention, which is taking place in the state of Wisconsin, in the city of Milwaukee. It gets underway officially on Monday. It's a 4-day convention. And at the end of it, on Thursday evening, that is the headline speech by Donald Trump. That is the moment that he is officially becomes the nominee of the Republican Party for November's presidential election. What is not clear is whether or not he will try and make an appearance earlier in the week, perhaps give a speech or be beamed in live to the site in Milwaukee, perhaps on Monday evening. At the last Republican convention, which was largely virtual due to COVID 4 years ago, he sent messages during the course of the week. Each one of the 4 nights he appeared either in person or live or with a pre-recorded message. That's something that we could potentially see from the president, but he says he's looking forward to going. It's going ahead, and the head of the Republican National Convention Committee says, if anything, this convention will be, in his words, epic.
Right, Nick Harper there joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Appreciate all the details and the analysis that you've shared with us for our audience.
And well, what are the larger political implications of this absolutely unprecedented attack? Of course, world leaders condemning it, but in the US as well, does it in a sense strengthen Trump's bid for the White House? Well, joining us for that, we're being joined by Raymond Vickery, former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce and Senior Associate, Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Vadvani Chair in Washington, D.C. Nish Acharya, former White House staff, is also with us. Rick Mehta, former Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate in New Jersey, is also with us on the broadcast, and we'll also be joined by Arshi Qureshi from outside the Trump Tower. Going across to you first, Rick Mehta, thanks very much for being with us. What really is the mood within the Republicans? Of course, they're furious, they're infuriated. In fact, Donald Trump has called for Republicans to unite at this hour. But ironically, Donald Trump has vowed to, in a sense, undo all the restrictions on gun laws that were brought in by the Biden administration. Does that stand to change also, given the fact that now you have this absolutely horrific incident? What are the Republicans thinking at this hour?
Well, I'll tell you right now, Republicans fight at the ballot, not with bullets, right? And right now, yes, there's a lot of anger because there's a lot of outstanding questions, but the temperature has been lowered. Republicans stand united. We continue to protest and rally in peacefully. And I was actually at the Trump rally a couple days ago in Miami, where it was a very patriotic, very sense of pride. A lot of people just peacefully gathering to hear how policy is going to influence America, how Trump is going to change the doldrums of America that we're currently in. And so there's a lot of optimism. And so when you have these types of incidents, these types of activities, this is not what the Republican Party stands for. Again, violence is not in our ethos. And right now, everyone is standing in solidarity, united under God, and praying for President Trump. As the attendees that were affected and implicated, we had one spectator that died. And right now, we are in a mode of praying and calling for peace.
Right. Nish Acharya, I want to go across to you. You have you've been former staff of President Obama as well as President Clinton. And at this point in time, we can see that this incident taking place in the middle of the U.S. presidential campaign. What happens to the campaign from now? Because that is one question which is coming in the foreground now after this incident. Of course, the Secret Service and the law enforcement agencies over there have a lot to answer for. But these open rallies, now, are we going to see the ones which are scheduled later during the calendar year ahead of the elections? Are we going to see some sort of a change taking place in the light of this incident? What changes in terms of the U.S. presidential campaign, do you think, according to you?
Right. So I think there will be some changes, not as much as people might think. I actually got my start 30 years ago on the political side of these rallies. And so the way they work in the United States and even in India, for the most part, is The political staff will organize the rally. They'll determine what's the photo image of the president that they would like. In this case, it was supporters behind him, farming community in Pennsylvania. And then it's the job of security agencies to figure out how to keep the president or the candidate secure in that environment. And so now that dynamic has shifted a little bit, where President Trump wanted his supporters closer. It's been a couple of times he's asked for some leniency because he wanted his rally goers to be closer to him. I think there'll be some questioning about that. Similarly with President Biden, there'll be a secure perimeter. So I think we will see more security at these rallies. What that means is it takes longer to get people in. It takes more time, more staff to be secure, more Secret Service, possibly military involved at a higher level. But ultimately, the political rally is a really big part of the American political experience. And I don't think that's going to change in the fall. And we've seen that, supporters of President Biden and President Trump will wait hours to see them. And so I think that's going to see the same. I think the change we'll see is that I think gun control will be back on the agenda. This gentleman had an AR-15, which is a military grade rifle. And in the United States, there are certain states where you can buy that in a grocery store, in a department store. And I want your Indian viewers to imagine going into a big box or something like that and buying a military rifle. That's how easy it is in the United States. And I hope that is back on the agenda, that there is a tradition of gun ownership in the United States, but it does not include military guns. And that needs to be a discussion, because that's exactly what happened here. There were security breakdowns by the Secret Service, but we know it was really easy for this gentleman to buy a war-fighting gun really easy and shoot it at a former president, which all sides have condemned. And so I think we really need to make sure that issue is back on the agenda.
And ironically, Donald Trump has, of course, supported, in a sense, the undoing of all the restrictions on gun laws. In fact, we saw the Texas gun owners rallying behind him as well. But Raymond Vickery, many say that this is, in a sense, a defining image, a defining video, something that could be a turning point in Donald Trump's presidential bid. How do the Democrats look at this? Do you see this, in a sense, strengthening Donald Trump's bid for the White House? Because we have seen in the past as well, Donald Trump does manage to score political brownie points out of any and every opportunity.
Well, thanks very much for having me. I think that the important point here is that the Gandhian principles of nonviolence, we must rededicate ourselves both nationally and internationally to it. There has been, unfortunately, in the United States, a culture of violence. I note that in addition to this shooting yesterday in Alabama, 4 people are killed in a mass shooting. You can see from the image that is on your screen that this is a military-style rifle. As you may know, with Senator Joe Biden, that kind of rifle was banned in the United States. It was allowed to come back and is now the weapon of choice. Were there lapses in security? Probably. If you can get a picture of a guy standing on the roof with the support in the military rifle, you know that something has gone wrong just by looking at the picture. Will it have an effect on the election? Sure, it's going to have an immediate effect. You could see that Donald Trump immediately raised his fist in defiance, as he did in the COVID era in ripping off his mask. He's a master of reality TV, and this will be used. Thank goodness he's called for unity at this point, and hopefully the temperature will be reduced on all sides. But the question is, unity for what? And I would submit that what we need to do is have unity for nonviolence, not characterizing your opponents as vermin, as poisoning the bloodstream of America, not advocating that people go to the Capitol to overturn an election. So we have to be able to lower this temperature, and we have to be able to come together. But of course, it's going to have political implications.
Right, interesting point there, and of course important to note that there's been a call, of course, for both sides, Democrats as well as Republicans, their leaders, to actually calm down in terms of the language that they use henceforth in the campaign. We are also joined by Arshi Qureshi, who is live outside the Trump Tower in New York. Arshi, we do know that, or at least reports suggest that Donald Trump is in Bedminster in New Jersey. But what is the mood like outside Trump Tower there this morning?
Yes, as you can see, there are a lot of Trump supporters there, and I want to gather from the information that I have, a lot of supporters will be coming over here outside Trump Tower to show their support. As you can see right now, there's a lot of security outside the Trump Tower over there. I'll just move my camera to show you.
Okay. Arshi, so a lot of Trump supporters have gathered outside. Did you manage to speak to some of them? What are they saying? The whole of US, as well as, they are, of course, waking up to the aftermath of this. Everybody saw the video of this incident has, of course, been playing out on TV screens across the world. But what exactly are you gathering from the Trump supporters? Why are they standing outside the Trump Tower this morning? What is their main demand?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat it? There's a lot of...
What's been the main demand of the Trump supporters outside Trump Tower? If you can also show around, the number of people who have gathered outside.
Yes, I have one. I have Tim over here to speak with me regarding the entire situation over here and how the supporters have gathered over here. Tim? So what is the situation right now? Like since yesterday, after the Trump shooting, the attempted assassination, and as you said, like a lot of more supporters are gathered over here. What do you have to say about it?
The political situation, we're on the borderline of civil war. That's what I believe.
You have to speak out.
We're in like the borderline of civil war. That's what I believe.
You are on border of civil war.
I say borderline.
Okay. Tim here says that we are on the borderline of the civil war, and next. As you can see, there are more supporters over here of Trump. We can actually speak with more people over here.
Thanks very much for joining us from outside Trump Towers there. In fact, Rick Mehta continues to be with us. Rick Mehta, how does this impact, in the sense the Republicans bid for the White House? Because we have seen differences of opinion within the Republican Party as well. Do you think that this would, in a sense, help you mobilize your cadre? What is your strategy going forward now? Because there were, of course, dissenting voices and naysayers, as it were, within the Republican Party as well.
Naysayers anymore. I think you see the number of endorsements that are pouring in for Donald Trump, many who have stayed quiet or stayed independent, even on the private sector. Elon Musk, Bill Ackman, so many billionaires that are now standing up saying enough is enough. We see the palpable bias. Listen, just a few days ago, President Biden sent out a notice to donors saying that it's time to put Trump in a bullseye. What did he mean by that? What did President Biden mean by saying, let's put Trump in a bullseye, and a couple days later, shots are fired against the former president? It is the amount of vilifying the former president between the court trials, the indictments, things that are completely unprecedented, that are laughable, absolutely laughable, and not one thing has slowed him down. In fact, his momentum continues to increase, not just among Republicans, but among staunch
Rick Mehta, while you say that, the fact of the matter is that the shooter was identified as a Pennsylvanian Republican. I mean, he was a registered Republican as per reports. So even
who donated to Democrats. Let's get the facts straight, though. He was 22. He's never voted in a presidential election, not old enough to, donated to Democrats. Come on. Registration was probably done by his parents at the time of his driver's license. That means nothing. So get your facts straight. Right now, the
well,
temperature
that is still in the
rising
realm
by
of
The
Nancy
investigation
Pelosi.
is
Yeah.
still on.
Yes.
We do not know enough about the shooter yet. The investigation is still on. It's early days for anyone to comment as to what could be the intent behind this particular attack. But the point that you have touched on, Rick Mehta, I want to take it across to Nish Acharya as well. Mr. Acharya, there's also been a lot of talk about how this time around in run up to the elections, there's been a lot of quote unquote incendiary language being used from both sides. You know, the Republicans might today point at something that Joe Biden said. Of course, Democrats would say that Joe Biden never meant it literally. But, you know, there's been a lot of concern about the kind of language that has been used in the run up to the elections. Do you agree that this has been particularly volatile this time around compared to the previous elections that US has seen?
I would disagree. I think if you did a assessment of the actual language that calls for violence, it's almost entirely on the conservative and Republican side. People try to equate liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans, and there's no correlation. All the calls for violence have come from the conservative side, just like the person you just talked to who said we're at a time of near civil war. I mean, that is not rhetoric you hear at all from the Democratic side. And again,
I'm talking about political leaders. That was somebody who's a Trump supporter standing in New York. But what about political
leaders? But they learn it from
leaders?
somewhere. They hear it somewhere, and they hear it from their political leaders. And that's gone on for a long time. And that correlates, you know, what leaders say affects what their followers start to believe. And that's true across the spectrum. But you do not in any way hear calls for violence from the vast majority, 99.9% of progressives and Democrats. You do hear more of it from conservatives. But there, I would like to say, you know, on the record, you hear it from a very, very small portion of Republicans and conservatives. Most of the American spectrum does not believe in this in any way, shape, or form. And I think our challenge is, how do we get that very small fraction out that is interested in these terrible sort of political overthrow, violence, all those things? How do we get them part of the mainstream? How do we get their concerns heard? And then how do we eliminate the threat of violence and all the things that we're hearing in the last 24 hours on social media?
Absolutely. And Raymond, Vikri, come in on this because, you know, again, I want to sort of touch a little bit upon the debate around gun violence, because that is an extremely contentious debate. It concerns Americans across the country, you know, and, you know, in the past, we have seen that mass shootings across the states, that has been a huge cause of concern. But the fact that you had Trump, in a sense, you know, say that I'll undo all the restrictions on gun laws that have been brought in by the Biden administration, you know, those have of course sparked raging debate across the United States. How do you see that debate now taking shape going forward? Because that's a debate that's been a defining one in the past few years, particularly.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to focus on this issue of gun violence. As I indicated earlier, this may have received a lot of attention because a presidential candidate was involved, but it's happening on a daily basis. Even at this rally, you have a person killed, two others in the hospital. We've got to get out from under this idea that it is somehow necessary to your political viability, manhood, if you will, that you be all in favor of taking away any restrictions on guns. There's no reason to have military-style rifles in the hands of civilians in the United States. And yet there are those who say that the AR-15 that was used in this style rifle is a symbol of somehow freedom. That's crazy. It's not at all. So we have to come together, but there has to be, it seems to me, again, a focus on nonviolence and being able to lower the temperature. I have no doubt that those Second Amendment advocates who are dyed in the wool aren't going to change a bit. I mean, there are large portions of the American people who think the only way to get bad guys is to arm every good guy. That we go back to the old West where everybody was walking around with a gun on their hip in order to be able to have a shootout. And that's a part of America. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think that the vast majority of Americans subscribe to it. And so there is hope that on the margins, the people who will be the deciders, if you will, in this election, that they're going to re-examine this whole ethos that gun culture is American culture. But it hasn't happened so far, and with the kinds of atrocities that we have seen time and time again in the United States, one wonders what it'll take to be able to turn this around.
Right. Rick Mehta, I know that there's, of course, it's not being discussed in much detail as to where Donald Trump is or what could be the plan over the next 24 hours before that event in Milwaukee. But anything that you can share in terms of how the preparations now change for the Republicans in a way, we still have to wait and see what further details the FBI or the law enforcement agencies have to share with us and whether or not there is any continuing threat on Mr. Trump. But in terms, because you're just 24 hours away from that event, any changes that you can share with us in terms of what we can see, any particular course correction that the Republican campaign is doing in terms of at least the preparations and the logistics part of it, that would be of interest?
Well, Republicans are more energized and more unified than ever. Almost every single Republican, even those that are quote unquote anti-Trump or those that ran against Trump, have come out with statements condemning this violence and offering their support against President Trump. He is our nominee. And unlike the Democrat Party that's completely divided, taking away from Biden's cognitive decline and not trying, they don't even know who their nominee is going to be at the convention, with so many Democrats trying to get Biden to step down. They're in a complete chaos. They're in a downward spiral. And one thing is for sure, 110%, all Republicans are unified around President Trump. He is here in New Jersey, in my home state of New Jersey, resting at Bedminster, and you will see him more fired up and more charged than ever, taking the nomination at the Republican National Committee and driving that straight to victory come November, so that we can finally have peace and prosperity back in our country again.
Absolutely. In fact, those calls for fight, fight, fight that we heard after that shooting and those gunshots were fired. So in a sense, many saying that this is a turning point as far as the presidential bid is concerned. But Nisha Chara, the other such assassination that comes to mind was, of course, that of Shinzo Abe. But, gun violence extremely rare in Japan. But when it comes to America, gun violence is not new. In fact, we've seen so many assassination attempts at top political leaders in the past as well. As somebody who's worked closely with the White House, what would your assessment be of all these questions being raised on security lapses? Did the Secret Service drop the ball? Because there are many unanswered questions. The FBI, of course, also probing the entire incident. The shooter has been killed on the spot. But, this raises larger, serious concerns about intelligence, about the Secret Service, and, where does the accountability really lie?
So I've worked with Secret Service agents for the last 30 years. With President Clinton, with President Obama, just last year with former President Clinton and former Secretary Clinton. And they are extraordinary human beings. They are committed to the safety of the politician, regardless of party. And the systems they have in place alongside other U.S. law enforcement agencies, all the way from local police, all the way to the very top, is extraordinary, the systems they have in place. There should be a assessment of what happened here, and that assessment should include both how the political side of the campaigns, and again, this is not a partisan issue. I think the same assessment should go on for the Biden campaign. Both campaigns need to look at how they're organizing rallies, are the locations they're picking safe, and then work with the security agencies to figure out where the candidate will be that's safest for everybody. Because again, in this case, the president was shot, but also, unfortunately, 2 supporters were critically injured and 1 died. So I think that assessment has to go in. I would be surprised if there was any deliberate malpractice by the Secret Service or anybody else. But that's different from, a legitimate assessment of whether mistakes were made or if there were lapses in coverage. So I expect that to happen. We won't know that before the election. So I think what they will see is tighter security, tighter restrictions on what the candidates where they can be, where they can stand, those sorts of things, and a lot more security for getting in and out of rallies. And that'll be where this comes out. And then in years past, we've had some challenges with the Secret Service, but again, that's not a partisan thing. That's something that'll be rectified by the bureaucratic government process if it turns out there were lapses.
Right, Raymond Vickery, we will have to give the last word to you. Standing today, what is your biggest concern as we head to the US elections? What is the number one thing that the Democrats and the Republicans need to address from here on to November?
Well, right now, what we need to do is to come together. The former president is right in terms of a need for unity. But again, it's unity for what? And the unity has to be based upon principles that Gandhi has taught the world, that Martin Luther King subscribed to. This is the big issue. We've got to be able to come together. We're a great nation, but it is not going to continue that way if we fight among ourselves and if we resort to violence as we've seen in the last couple of days.
Well, thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the debate this evening. Of course, this is the biggest development perhaps in the past couple of months ahead of those crucial presidential elections in the United States of America. And of course, this has huge geopolitical ramifications as well. And this has sent shockwaves across the world.
Right, Vedant. And as we know that it is the morning hours in the US, and we are expecting more news to come in terms of all the gaps which were left out on the FBI press conference earlier on their Saturday and earlier today for us, and we'll of course have to wait and see whether or not those answers come forth. Also, whether or not Donald Trump, the former US president and the presumptive nominee for the Republicans, is going to make a video statement or not. We've already seen 2 statements coming out on his social media platform, but we'll have to wait and see whether he makes an on-camera statement. So lots of developments still left on this big story that we have been tracking, but for the moment we'll be heading into a short break. Stay tuned as more news and updates come up on the other side.